Imagine a hidden financial structure valued at nearly $900 trillion, silently controlled by just 4 U.S. banks. It is not traditional debt, it is a colossal web of derivative contracts tying the fate of the entire global system to the quiet bets of JPMorgan, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, and Bank of America. If a single node snaps, the consequences could dwarf any crisis you remember. So, how did risk reach this scale, and why does nobody talk about it? Derivatives are financial contracts that draw their value from something else, a stock, a bond, a currency, or even a simple interest rate. They come in many forms: swaps, futures, options, and forwards. At their core, these contracts are bets, agreements to pay or receive money if certain things happen in the markets. But the numbers involved are staggering. According to the Bank for International Settlements, the notional value of all outstanding derivatives worldwide is estimated at between $700 trillion and $900 trillion. That figure is more than 8 times the size of the world economy. 900. Most of these contracts never exchange the full notional amount. Instead, they settle on the difference between market prices, what is called cash settlement. But the notional value reveals the scale of exposure built into the system. For example, a single interest rate swap might be written for $1 billion, but only a fraction of that changes hands if rates move. Multiply this by millions of contracts, and the web of obligations becomes almost impossible to track. 1 billion swaps allow parties to exchange one stream of payments for another, often to hedge against rising or falling interest rates. Futures are standardized bets on the future price of an asset. Options give the right, but not the obligation, to buy or sell at a set price. Forwards are private agreements to buy or sell later with terms set between the two parties. Hedge. Each of these contracts is layered on top of the next, creating a network where risk is passed from hand to hand but never truly disappears. When the notional value reaches $900 trillion, even the smallest miscalculation can ripple across the entire system. Risk, JPMorgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, and Bank of America sit at the center of the U.S. derivatives universe. Together, these 4 banks control nearly 80% of all notional derivatives exposure among American commercial banks, according to the OCC's most recent data. Their combined books total more than $175 trillion, numbers so vast they dwarf the entire U.S. economy. JPMorgan alone carries over $58 trillion in notional exposure, with Goldman Sachs close behind at $51.5 trillion. Citibank and Bank of America bring in $37.2 trillion and $28 trillion respectively. This concentrated control is not just a matter of scale, it is a structural vulnerability. The vast majority of derivatives, especially interest rate swaps, are traded between these same few institutions. Dealer-to-dealer trades account for about 70% of the total notional, creating a tight web where risk is passed around but never truly leaves the room. If one of these banks falters, the shockwaves would reverberate instantly through the others, forcing them to recognize losses and scramble for collateral. Despite the lessons of 2008, post-crisis reforms like the Dodd-Frank Act have left loopholes wide enough for these giants to maintain their dominance. Interest rate swaps, the largest category, remain lightly regulated compared to other derivatives. The big 4 banks use their lobbying power to secure key exemptions, keeping much of their trading activity in the shadows. Regulators have flagged these concentrations as a single point of failure, warning that a default by any one of these banks could trigger a chain reaction that the system is not prepared to contain. The risk is not just theoretical, it is built into the very architecture of modern finance. AIG once stood as the world's largest insurer, quietly selling credit default swaps to banks and investors across the globe. These swaps acted as insurance on mortgage-backed securities, promising to pay out if the bonds failed. When the U.S. housing market collapsed in 2007 and 2008, those promises came due all at once. AIG's exposure was massive, over $440 billion in guarantees, with $57.8 billion tied to subprime mortgages. As default surged, AIG simply did not have enough cash to cover the avalanche of claims. Panic spread across the trading floor in mid-September 2008, as counterparties demanded billions in collateral. By September 16, 2008, AIG was out of options. The Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury stepped in with $85 billion in emergency funding, later swelling to $182 billion to stop a global meltdown. Without this lifeline, every bank and pension fund holding AIG's swaps would have faced instant losses, threatening to freeze the entire financial system. The rescue was not just for AIG. It was a desperate move to keep the web of derivatives from snapping and dragging the world economy down with it. Lehman Brothers entered bankruptcy on September 15, 2008, with nearly 900,000 open derivative contracts. In the hours after the filing, a legal provision known as the safe harbor exemption allowed counterparties to bypass the normal bankruptcy process. Instead of waiting for a judge, trading partners rushed to terminate contracts and seize collateral instantly. The result was a financial stampede. Nearly 1 million over-the-counter contracts were torn up or closed out in a single day, flooding the market with forced sales and sudden losses. For every contract that vanished, another bank or hedge fund was left scrambling to rebalance its own risk, triggering a chain reaction that spread far beyond Lehman's walls. The safe harbor rules, designed to keep markets orderly, instead turned bankruptcy into a fire sale, accelerating the collapse. What began as one firm's failure rippled outward in minutes, exposing the fragility of a system where every player is linked by invisible threads of obligation. Interest rate swaps now dominate the world of derivatives, and their hidden leverage sits at the heart of the system's vulnerability. These contracts allow banks, funds, and corporations to bet on the direction of interest rates using borrowed money. In practice, a small move in rates can trigger losses that are out of all proportion to the original wager. A 1% jump in rates can force hundreds of billions in collateral calls across the banking sector. For some funds, the effective leverage can reach 30, 60, or even 100 times their underlying capital. That means a tiny shift, a quarter-point rise, can wipe out years of gains and force desperate asset sales. Commercial real estate has become a flashpoint. Regional banks, already exposed to falling property values, use derivatives to hedge their loan books. But when rates rise quickly, these hedges can backfire. Losses multiply, and banks must scramble to find cash for margin calls. The 2022 UK pension crisis showed how a sudden spike in yields can trigger a chain reaction, with pension funds forced to dump assets to meet derivative obligations. The same mechanics are now at work in US regional banks, where hidden exposures threaten to turn a modest rate hike into a full-blown liquidity crisis. This is the amplification effect at the core of the debt bomb. Leverage built into derivatives can magnify a simple rate move by a factor of 100, turning minor shocks into existential threats for banks, funds, and ultimately the financial system itself. March 2020 brought the system to the edge. As global markets convulsed, clearinghouses, those hidden giants that stand between every major derivatives trade, issued record-breaking variation margin calls. In a single day, demands for extra collateral soared past $40 billion, draining member banks' reserves at a speed that stunned even seasoned risk officers. Phones rang off the hook in London and New York as executives scrambled to meet margin calls before the deadline. Some clearing members nearly missed the cutoff, forcing emergency meetings with central banks to keep the payment rails open. Clearinghouses are built to survive the default of their two largest members, drawing first on posted collateral, then on mutualized default funds. But as margin spirals accelerate, even these resources can be exhausted in hours. When that happens, rulebooks allow clearinghouses to trigger assessment powers, calling on surviving members to inject more cash, or, if needed, forcibly haircut gains from winning trades to cover losses. If the waterfall runs dry, authorities step in. Statutory bail-in language, embedded in post-crisis reforms, hands regulators the power to seize uninsured deposits and creditor claims to recapitalize the system, without a vote and without warning. Behind closed doors, policymakers have drafted plans for a digital dollar ready to deploy if traditional payment systems freeze. In a full-blown clearinghouse failure, bank accounts could be converted overnight, with access tightly controlled by central authorities. The toolkit is in place: bail-ins, asset freezes, and digital rails that can be switched on at a moment's notice. When the next margin spiral hits, the rescue won't come cheap, and the cost will land far beyond Wall Street. Right now, nearly 90% of U.S. bank derivatives remain concentrated in just 4 hands, exposing the system to a single point of failure. As leverage unwinds in real time, stability hangs by a thread. The next shock won't just threaten banks, it will test the value of money itself.